Ja, wir schauen noch einmal auf die Grünen, denn die Co-Chefin irritierte nur mit kontroversen Aussagen über die Bundeswehr. In einer Rede im britischen Oxford sprach Franziska Brandner einerseits für eine gemeinsame nukleare Abschreckung in Europa, vor allem wegen der Bedrohung durch Russland. Andererseits warnte sie davor, dass auf dem alten Kontinent die Angst vor einem militärisch wiedererstarkten Deutschland wieder steige.
Die Bundeswehr rüstet auf, wenn es nach Kanzler Merz geht, zur konventionell stärksten Armee in Europa. Doch das mache den Partnern Angst, warnt Grünen-Chefin Franziska Brandner bei einer Rede an der Uni Oxford. Zwar seien die Europäer erleichtert darüber, dass Deutschland seiner Verantwortung in Verteidigungsfragen nun stärker nachkomme, aber hinter der Erleichterung verbergen sich bei denselben Partnern, die eine stärkere Bundeswehr begrüßen, auch Gefühle, die sie aus Höflichkeit nicht laut aussprechen. Ein stilles, anhaltendes, historisch verwurzeltes Unbehagen angesichts der Aussicht auf einen Kontinent, auf dem Deutschland wieder mit deutlichem Abstand die dominierende Militärmacht ist. Zustimmung von Historikern.
Ein Stichwort, das Frau Brandner auch benutzt, nie wieder allein Deutschland, sondern Deutschlands Aufrüstung, die sie befürwortet, völlig zu Recht, sie sei notwendig, stimmt, aber in einen gesamteuropäischen Verbund.
Die Bundesregierung teilt die Sorge Brandners nicht. Europa habe Angst vor einem militärisch erstarkten Deutschland. Alle deutschen Truppen seien eng eingebunden in die NATO-Strukturen, wie etwa aktuell in Litauen als Führung der NATO-Streitkräfte.
Es wird eine stärkere deutsche Rolle in der europäischen NATO erwartet. Die Partner wissen, dass wir das nur im Einvernehmen mit ihnen machen und deswegen höre ich weder von Abgeordneten noch von Außen- und Verteidigungsministern in Europa irgendwelche Sorge, dass Deutschland da zu weit gehen könnte.
Doch laut Franziska Brandner verstärkten besonders die momentanen Umfrageerfolge der AfD das Unbehagen der Nachbarn. Was, wenn die Partei eines Tages über den Einsatz der Waffen bestimmt und deutsche militärische Alleingänge plant?
Deutsche militärische Alleingänge sind laut unserer Verfassung verboten und laut sämtlicher Rechtsprechung des Bundesverfassungsgerichts. Man sollte viel stärker im Blick behalten, dass 2027 in Frankreich die reale Möglichkeit besteht, also wesentlich früher als bei uns, dass ein Präsident vom Rassemblement National kommt und dann hätten wir ein Frankreich mit einer tendenziell Pro-Putin-Partei, das über Nuklearwaffen verfügt.
Für viele Sicherheitsexperten gibt es nur einen Weg. Europa muss sich militärisch zusammenschließen, um global strategisch zu bestehen. Deutschlands Bundeswehr muss aus ihrer Sicht dafür weiter gestärkt werden.
Last week, for the first time in the post-war era, Germany unveiled a new military strategy to significantly boost troop numbers, including active duty soldiers, reservists and civilian employees, with the stated aim of having at least 460,000 combat-ready soldiers by 2039. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius presented the new strategy, reportedly titled Responsibility for Europe, to Germany's Defence Committee on Wednesday, with one of Germany's ruling parties describing it as a comprehensive concept to address the increased threat potential, particularly from Russia. It also follows reports earlier this month that US President Donald Trump is considering withdrawing US troops from Europe, and follows an arguably overlooked Reuters exclusive published in December 2025, suggesting the US had set a deadline for Europe to replace the US's role in NATO by 2027. So in this video, we'll explain Germany's massive rearmament, why it's happening, and whether Germany could actually replace the US in NATO. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. First though, some context about German military spending. In their coalition agreement, published in April last year, Germany's centre-right Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, and centre-left Social Democratic Party, or SPD, pledged to create a new, attractive military service, initially based on voluntary participation, aiming to introduce flexible service and career models, as well as increasing the proportions of women and people with immigrant backgrounds in the army. Around the same time, Chancellor Friedrich Merz passed a constitutional amendment to exclude all military spending from Germany's constitutional spending limit, the debt brake, and create a €500 billion special fund to invest in German transport infrastructure that would be needed to transfer tanks and troops to the Eastern Front if a war broke out with Russia. This decision to lift the borrowing limit, specifically for defence spending, has given Germany more fiscal room than other European countries, which are also trying to increase their military spending while facing high government debt. For context, as agreed at the 2025 NATO summit, European NATO countries are aiming to spend 3.5% of their annual budgets on defence by 2035. But right now, only 3, Poland, Latvia and Lithuania, meet this target. France plans to spend around 2.6% of its annual budget on defence by 2030, equivalent to around 76 billion euros, while Germany is apparently on track to reach its 3.5% defence spending target by 2029, when it will spend around 153 billion euros on defence. However, in terms of the scale of its policy turnaround and financial commitment, Germany is arguably undergoing the most dramatic rearmament in Europe. We can see this in Germany's ambitious goal to more than double the size of its armed forces, the Bundeswehr, by 2039. At the moment, France has the largest EU military, despite being its second most populous country after Germany, with more than 200,000 soldiers in 2024, compared to Germany's roughly 180,000, Poland's 164,000, and Italy's 162,000. Like most European forces, the Bundeswehr has shrunk significantly since the end of the Cold War. In the 1990s, Germany counted nearly 500,000 troops, but today has around 186,000. While reports last year stated that the government was aiming to expand the size of the Bundeswehr to 260,000 troops by 2035, last week Germany announced a longer-term target that's even bigger and more ambitious. At a press conference on Wednesday, SPD Defence Minister Pistorius said that the goal is to have at least 460,000 combat-ready soldiers, including both active and reserve forces, by 2039, adding that Germany will also take on more responsibility within NATO over the coming years. Germany's new military strategy also follows reports from earlier this month that US President Donald Trump was considering withdrawing US troops from Europe, or even pulling the US out of NATO. In December, a Reuters report said US officials had set a deadline of 2027 for Europe to replace the US's role in NATO, something many European officials viewed as unrealistic and also alarming, given the scale and pace of the rearmament this would require. As such, Germany's new military strategy states that Germany, as the EU's biggest economy, has a, quote, special responsibility for European security, which, whilst not naming the US specifically, seems to be mainly directed at American officials. By proving that Germany is taking European security and Trump's threats seriously, Germany seems to be lining itself up to take on a bigger leadership role within NATO, regardless of whether the US withdraws. But will Germany's massive rearmament drive succeed? Is it really possible that Germany could replace the US's role in NATO by 2027? Well, firstly, if we haven't made it clear enough, this really is an enormous undertaking. As well as ramping up defence spending, Germany is trying to increase domestic production of defence equipment, reform its slow military procurement system and speed up construction on military bases, and also increase civil resistance, i.e. greater cooperation between the Bundeswehr and local communities, as part of a whole-of-society approach, similar to that of countries like Estonia. Secondly, political disagreements could complicate some parts of Germany's rearmament. Late last year, for instance, a row erupted in the governing coalition over its draft military service bill, the Defence Service Modernisation Act, between Germany's centre-right CDU, which supported a lottery element that would call up young men for compulsory military service if the proposed voluntary scheme failed to recruit enough people, and the centre-left SPD, which opposed the lottery element over concerns it would be seen as unfair. In the end, the bill was scaled back to a purely voluntary scheme and came into force on the 1st of January. This suggests that tensions could arise again within the coalition, if not over the scale of Germany's rearmament, then perhaps over how to achieve it. Thirdly, Germany's procurement deadlines are arguably not soon enough for the government's aims. Analysts have pointed out that procuring bespoke systems, such as the Puma infantry fighting vehicle and parts for the Eurofighter Typhoon jet, have often ended up more expensive and less reliable than expected, largely due to over-optimistic planning or complications with international collaboration. For instance, the years-old Franco-German fighter jet project, the Future Combat Air System, or FCAS, has stalled due to tensions between contractors, with Merz and Macron meeting this week and asking their respective defence ministries to help get the project back on track. Even if FCAS does eventually happen, the debacle is a bad sign for European rearmament, as it's shown how national rivalries can override the urgent strategic need for intra-European collaboration. Finally, on the question of replacing the US's capabilities in NATO, well, it's highly unlikely that Europe, or Germany, will be ready for this by 2027. Time is needed to build new infrastructure, train personnel, and overcome delays in procurement. Moreover, the US Pentagon hasn't specified how it will measure Europe's progress, or even what proportion of NATO capabilities should come under European control, highlighting the uncertainty of Europe's current defence predicament. Ultimately, Germany's massive rearmament is perhaps best viewed as a serious signal, both to America and Russia, that the country is stepping up on European security. That said, it's also a genuine strategy, as European analysts and leaders increasingly fear the US might refuse to defend Europe in the event of a major war. Keeping up to date with stories like these and doing independent journalism requires a lot of constant research across all corners of the internet, and even sometimes calls for international travel. But it's not uncommon that we come across roadblocks, whether that be dubious-looking websites that claim to be safe, dodgy Wi-Fi connections in airports or cafes, or even region-locked articles. And we couldn't get by any of these barriers without a trusted VPN, so that's where NordVPN comes into play. That's because NordVPN not only offers you the fastest VPN on the planet, giving you quick and secure streaming wherever you are, but it also keeps you fully safe from all the suspicious corners of the internet. NordVPN's Threat Protection Pro feature is built to protect you by blocking dangerous ads, stopping you from entering malware hosting websites, and running through checks on everything you download. If anything is found to be infected and dangerous, the files are removed before they can harm you. But if you're rightfully concerned about your life before NordVPN, they've got you covered. Their dark web monitor will be constantly scanning the seedy underbelly of the internet even when you're not connected to a VPN, and will alert you if any of your old data or passwords have been sold. From there, NordPass will give your old passwords a huge upgrade and keep them all in one place for you to easily and safely manage. In today's world, we couldn't imagine even just existing on the internet without a VPN, so there's no better time to take your internet safety seriously. So if your online safety is as important to you as it is to us, sign up to NordVPN today. Simply click the link in the description or go to nordvpn.com/TLDR. And not only will you get a massive discount, but you also get 4 extra months totally free. There's no better time to protect yourself. So once again, that's nordvpn.com/TLDR. And it's completely risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee.
Germany's new chancellor has vowed to build the strongest army in Europe,
promising to supercharge the country's armed forces after years of neglect.
To the German chancellor, Russia's actions in Ukraine have changed everything.
We are in an era of rearmament.
Hello and welcome to The Nexus. Germany is preparing for war in a way we haven't seen in a very long time. Should we be concerned? For many years after World War II, Germany's military was very tightly restricted. But now, 80 years after the Nazis were defeated, Germany is preparing to turbocharge its army, just in case Russia invades. Is that a good idea? We'll hear from the experts in just a moment.
The big threat from Russia will emerge as soon as the war in Ukraine comes to a close.
This is false talk, false premise, designed to serve the interests of a military-industrial elite.
Germany's defense capacity is not credible.
More from them coming up, but first a quick look at what's going on in Germany.
German troops moving into Lithuania. Symbolically, a sight that would have proved too much for many people before February 2022.
The idea that Germany could have a leading role as a military power doesn't, let's put it mildly, bring good associations.
But Russian troops invading Ukraine changed everything. German troops are back in Eastern Europe. The 45th Armoured Brigade will be fully deployed in Lithuania by 2027.
Today marks a step into a new era. Never before have we permanently stationed a large military unit abroad.
Anger and fear of Moscow has pushed Berlin to what it calls Zeitenwende, a turning point.
The head of the German armed forces has told DW News that Germany needs to be ready for war in order to prevent it.
We have 5 to 8 years. And 5 to 8 years when the reconstitution of the Russian forces is at a level that an attack against NATO territory might be possible.
Olaf Scholz, Chancellor when Russia sent troops into Ukraine, pledged a €100 billion fund to modernise Germany's armed forces and committed to NATO's defence spending target of 2% of GDP. New Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who served in the military himself, has gone even further, He changed the constitution so more money can be borrowed to spend on the military. The fund is now €500 billion. And he's pledging to increase defence spending to 5% of GDP by 2032. Merz has big ambitions.
Die Bundeswehr braucht, konventionell zur stärksten Armee Europas zu werden.
Germany will need every penny if it truly wants to build the strongest military in Europe. Its equipment is outdated, infrastructure poor, and it struggles to attract recruits. Because all of this is a frankly historic departure for post-war Germany.
Many Germans are inherently wary of war and the military, and that comes down a lot of the time to the country's recent history.
The legacy of guilt from World War II saw strict constitutional limits put in place, and with the US-led NATO guaranteeing protection, Berlin concentrated on becoming an economic powerhouse. Trump has now shown NATO can no longer take US support for granted.
If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. I got into a lot of heat when I said that. He said, oh, he's violating NATO.
Traditionally, public opinion has shown Germans prefer diplomacy over military power, but the war in Ukraine has changed things. Polling in Germany shows strong support now for an increase in military spending. 66% say they are in favour. The times, they are changing.
OK, let's bring in our guests now. And today we have David DeRoche, a former Pentagon official based in Washington, German military expert Torsten Heinrich, and Marco Gasic, an international affairs analyst based in London. Welcome to the programme, everyone. Marco, I'll start with you because I know you have some very grave concerns about Germany's plans to remilitarise.
Yeah, it's déjà vu. I mean, we had a problem with the continuity of German foreign policy between the First and the Second World War, and there's a danger of it spreading into a third. As far as I can see, this hysterical talk about the need for rearmament based on a Russian threat is based on a completely false premise. The Russians have barely managed to scrape through bits of Ukraine. They're hardly likely to want to take the rest of Europe or in a position to do so, nor would they have any reason to do so, because they have no desire for the population over there, which has no desire for them. They have no desire for the resources because they've got their loads of their own, and they have a sufficient land area to cover them 5 times over. So I say this is false talk, false premise, designed to serve the interests of a military-industrial elite. It's always the elites who ask for it and the ordinary people who pay for it.
Torsten?
Well, he's right in the fact that Russia struggles with Ukraine, but the big threat from Russia will emerge as soon as the war in Ukraine comes to a close. And the Russians have capabilities to attack again. And then again, the rearmament of Germany isn't meant to defeat Russia. It's meant to deter Russia. So the goal isn't to stop the Russians and then have a 4-year slugfest to wait until one side has bled out. The goal is to stop the Russians from even attempting. And for that, the own deterrence must be strong enough, and that it isn't. The German Inspector General of the Armed Forces said at the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine, of the full invasion, that Germany is incapable of fighting. The ammunition storages would have been sufficient for several days. A deterrence is necessary, as Russia has proven now for the 3rd time that they are a revanchist imperialist power that is willing and capable of expanding its territory with military means. And thus it would be ludicrous to expect Russia to this time for real have enough. But the threat is continuing. Russia has proven to be a military threat, and thus the threat must be stopped, ideally without fighting, but you can only stop an aggressor without fighting if you can deter him. And for that, you need capable military forces, which Germany right now does not have.
David, do you think Germany is using Russia's aggression towards Ukraine as a pretext to rearm, or do you think it is actually warranted?
Well, it's not a pretext, it's an imperative. I agree with Torsten on this. Germany's defense capacity is not credible as a deterrent force, and they've neglected it. The fear of German militarism, I think, has been superseded. I think that there's been, 4 generations of Germans who understand this, and now they realize that militarism, the revised Wilhelmine or Hitlerite stuff, that's kind of been bred out of them. The world has changed, and just as the United States Army occupied Montreal before the United States declared independence, but now we get along pretty well with the Canadians, current president notwithstanding. Germany and France, Germany and Britain, Germany and Europe is stable. Their security role needs to be credible, and unfortunately it is not. And the United States can't be expected to indefinitely subsidize socialized economies in Europe when they don't do it themselves.
David, you say that, but there's a very famous BBC interview with the son of a former, very prominent Nazi leader. And he said, Torsten, he said, you can't trust us. He said, whilst the economy is good, okay, but if we were to suffer, say, 5 or 10 years of economic turmoil, he says, we will change.
Well, the idea then would be, who is that guy and what is his political agenda?
Hans Frank's son, yeah.
Yeah, but where is he standing politically now? Because obviously you have fractions of the German political spectrum, some of it clearly pro-Russian, that are against the rearmament. And if he's part of this, then we already have the answer why he's saying that. So we need to look at the source why he says this. The fact that he's the son of Hans Frank, the criminal who was the, I think, Gauleiter in Poland, doesn't change that. The question is German rearmament going to be an issue? First of all, we are far away from being even capable of being a threat. That's even with a significant rearmament, Germany's neighbors are still militarily stronger. The Polish army could probably right now march through the Rhine without too much of a problem. The next thing is Germany's neighbors want a German rearmament. We are living in a world where the Polish would hope for a stronger German army, where the Polish people wish for German soldiers on Polish soil to protect them from the Russians.
Let me put that to Marco, if I may. Marco, Germany's neighbors want a militarily strong Germany to protect them from Russia.
Once again, the entire conversation, especially Thorsten's, is based on a false premise. Deterrence. The best way of deterring anyone is to have good relations with them. You don't have to spend billions of euros arming against them to deter them from attacking you if they like you, if they are happy with trading with you. And we had decades of peaceful prosperity for Germany with no deterrence of the kind being envisaged. Russia was perfectly happy to buttress German prosperity for decades and had no plans to change anything in that until the NATO expansion to Russia's gullet, to Russia's throat, with a militarized campaign which brooked no dissent, despite all the promises NATO and Germany made to Russia at the end of the Cold War in 1990. All the false promises. The best way of deterring anybody is to have good relations with them, and Germany is in no position to get a better outcome for itself, for its people, by rearming, risking war, and spending all the family money on investing on insanity instead of infrastructure.
Torsten, just a quick question.
I perfectly agree. I perfectly agree with him. Good relations are a way to deter war, but for good relations, two parties are necessary. And if one of them is willing to invade its neighbors, if one of them is willing to commit massacres and large-scale war crimes with the attempt to expand its own territory, then good relations, if one side simply tries to be nice, will not be sufficient.
Marco, I have to move to David. Marco, I have to move to David, I'm afraid, otherwise we won't get him in. David, we know that Germany has just launched its first permanent troop deployment overseas since World War II, a 5,000-strong armoured brigade in Lithuania. What signal is Germany putting out there?
Well, I would argue that Germany's deployment in Afghanistan, while it wasn't permanent, it was far more significant, and particularly because they took casualties. And I was in Afghanistan in March 2003 when the Germans lost a number of soldiers in an ambush. And honestly, we expected a bunch of planes to take off in the middle of the night, wake up the next morning and say, where are the Germans? So they have already accepted a role here. Look, my opinion, Marco's opinion, Thorsten's opinion, they're important, but look at somebody like the Swedes, who have 400 years of neutrality, and they are very good at managing their own affairs. They've determined that Russia is a threat, and the centuries-long tradition of neutrality cannot be abided in an era of rampant Russian imperialism. And until we invent the love bomb and drop it around the world, unfortunately, you have to have military credibility in order to enforce the values that you see are there. German values are Western values. I taught the German War College last Tuesday. They were here in Washington. There have been German bases in the United States, and we all get along. So the question is, what is the place of Germany in the world? And right now, their security place, their security capabilities are out of alignment with their values and their ambitions, and with Western values and ambitions.
David, watching
there's not a contradiction.
David, watching events from Washington, when you see Germany deploying 5,000 men to Lithuania, for example, what do you make of that? Don't you feel that to be provocative of the Russians?
Well, so Russia claims a right to intervene in Lithuania, which was forcibly incorporated into the Soviet Union during the period of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. So two things. First, as a military man, the Germans always go in heavy. When you look at German military deployments, it's kind of like trying to devise the world's heaviest airplane. They usually send 5,000 guys to do a mission that 2,500 guys could do. But what this shows is Lithuania is an independent nation. It is a member of the European Union. It is a member of NATO. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to make it a member of NATO at the time, but it is, and it is a sovereign nation. This is an alliance member bolstering the sovereignty of another alliance member that Russia has claimed a right to intervene in militarily. So this is deterrence in action, and it's deterrence in accordance with Western values. And quite frankly, we need more of that from the Germans. They're able to do it in Lithuania because it's close by.
We spoke to Greece's former finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis. He's got his own personal issues with Germany, and he's quite worried about this. Let's have a listen.
Well, the idea of a rearming Germany, which is increasingly sliding into a totalitarian mire, is something to lose sleep over. Last year, I was banned from entering Germany because I'm not a supporter of the Palestinian genocide. I'm a European, not just politician, but citizen, and they saw it fit to violate every principle of the European Union without a due process. In the end, I ended up taking them to court. I am now disputing the right of the German state to ban people like me from Germany. And I discover every day, increasingly, that the rule of law is a figment of our imagination in Germany and in Europe. So if you combine rearmament with the slide into totalitarianism of the German Federal Republic, as I said, there is plenty of reason to lose your sleep over this.
Torsten, what do you make of Yanis Varoufakis' concerns there? He says it's the last thing the world needs is a country slipping into totalitarianism, the rule of law hanging by a thread, to be rearming.
Well, that Germany has some issues is obvious, like most countries have some issues. Could it be better? Obviously too. But we could look to Freedom House, where Germany's place was, as far as I remember, the 21st. So the 21st most free country in the world, despite limitations, despite some criticism in regards to its free speech laws, for instance. And as far as I remember, Greece was behind that without Germany being afraid of dictatorship entering politics in Greece.
Torsten, the deployment of 5,000 German soldiers to Lithuania, what is the point of that militarily?
It's a tripwire deployment. It's to show the allies inside of NATO that Germany is committed to their defense, and to show the Russians, if you invade Lithuania, you have to kill German soldiers, and for that you might probably draw Germany into war. So it's a deployment that was necessary because of Russian aggression, because the Lithuanians feel threatened like the rest of the Baltics, and this is to assure them and to make sure that Russia is deterred, and if it isn't, that Lithuania will not have to fight alone for its freedom.
David, Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently said that Russia is afraid of the United Kingdom's nuclear prowess, especially the Trident submarines and so on, and that would be sufficient to prevent any conflict with them. Well, he may not have gone quite that far, but do you think that Russia is scared of the UK's nuclear deterrent?
I think that it's a concern, both the French and the UK nuclear deterrent, but neither of them are adequate. For decades, there had been this idea that if you had nuclear weapons, you were immune from attack. But just in the last 2 years, we've seen China kill Indian soldiers on Indian terrain in the Himalayas. That's one nuclear power. We've seen Iran launch an attack on Israel, a presumed nuclear power. Israel launched an attack on Iran, close to nuclear power. Iran launched an attack in Pakistan, a nuclear power, and then Pakistan responding. So I think that unless you're ready to use nuclear weapons, which I don't think the Keir Starmer government is, you have to have something credible below that, and that requires a strong conventional force.
Torsten Heinrich, David DeRoche, and Marco Gasic, thank you all very much. Much appreciated. Now, can Europe rely on the United States to supply it with their best weapons? I refer particularly to the F-35 fighter jets. Some European countries are reportedly worried that the United States could shut them down remotely if Europe and America suddenly had a diplomatic falling out.
The F-35 is a fifth-generation fighter with stealth capabilities and AI built in. It's one of the most advanced jets in the air. Each one costs between $80 and $100 million for America's European allies. All these countries have bought one. Germany alone has spent over $5 billion on its fleet, almost 6% of its defence budget. But customers are concerned about rumours of a kill switch, essentially allowing the US to turn the F-35 off. That's been denied, but the F-35 does rely on a software system called Odin, and if the US stops sending updates, the jets would be severely compromised. Most European operators don't have full access to Odin. Only the UK and Israel are able to modify or audit critical systems without America's approval. So maybe there is something in it.
We'd like to tone them down about 10%, which probably makes sense because someday maybe they're not our allies, right?
Well, joining us now, we have two of the foremost experts on the F-35. Alan Williams, former head of procurement at the Canadian Defence Department. He was part of the team that acquired the F-35 for the Canadian Air Force. And Bill Sweetman, author of $1 Trillion Train Wreck, How the F-35 Hollowed Out the US Air Force. Welcome to the program, both of you. Alan.
Nice to be here.
The question on everyone's mind is, do these aircraft, these fighter jets, really have some kind of kill switch on them?
I'm not sure if the right terminology is kill switch. I think it's more appropriate just to say that the US has control over the software, and in particular the mission data file. Without being able to upgrade that, the plane becomes much less effective. And if the US controls that and decides for whatever reason not to provide Canada with the upgrades, our F-35s would become totally ineffective.
And Canada apparently is looking for alternatives now to the F-35. Does that, under Mark Carney, does that mean that they are concerned?
Well, we better be concerned. You can't have someone else control your, multi-billion-dollar asset without being concerned. Up until now, the notion of the U.S. trying to exert that kind of formal oversight wasn't contemplated. I mean, we have a great relationship, fought together in World War I, World War II. NORAD, North American Air Defense, is a joint effort. Never would we have expected this kind of relationship. But when it does arise, we're a sovereign country, and to ignore it would be irresponsible.
Bill, do you think there's an actual, realistic chance that that would happen?
Well, I think that the US has certainly planned for doing that. The US deliberately maintained control of the software and did not release what they call the source code to export customers. In fact, all that the mission data file that Alan was talking about, those are updated in labs in Florida at Eglin Air Force Base that are clearly under full-time US control. So, and I think just to sort of emphasize on that, the mission data file is very important because an aircraft like the F-35 is a flying computer system, and everything that the system does automatically to help the pilot, such as identify targets or or maintain a track that keeps the aircraft as stealthy as possible from the adversary sensors, radars out there. Everything that the aircraft does is run by the mission data file. It's a top level control over what the aircraft does.
And has the United States ever pulled the plug before?
No, they've never pulled the plug on an aircraft before. They withdrew support. I mean, a long time ago, they sold F-14s to what was then the Shah of Iran, and withdrew support after they withdrew space support and logistics support after the revolution. And in fact, that was a bit of a lesson for them because the Iranians managed to keep the aircraft operational. So I think they've provided for that, but they've never been in a situation. There's never been a situation where the U.S. has really has needed to do that.
Alan, if you were procuring fighter jets for Canada today, would you be concerned by what Trump said about how the next generation of jets sold to other countries ought to be inferior, maybe 10% inferior, to the ones intended for the U.S. military?
Well, I'd be concerned about it, but in any procurement, I would go about it the same standard way. I would make sure that our military defines its requirements properly, and then I'd search around the world to find the best one. And if we thought that the risks from the American options were too great, for whatever reason, there's a lot of other options around the world that we would pursue.
Economically, though, are you sort of painted into a corner? Apparently, Denmark says it will continue to buy them despite the tensions over Greenland because they can't afford to change at this point. Is that Canada's economic reality as well?
To the contrary. I mean, the fact is this is a very, very, very expensive aircraft. Many of the options are much, much less expensive. So if we limited ours to, say, the first 16, and we bought the balance of our 88 elsewhere, we would probably be saving a lot of money.
Bill, we're coming towards the end now, but the F-47, named after the 47th President of the United States by the generals, it was their idea, apparently. Just wondering, Bill, how good is this? Apparently it's been flying around in secret for 5 years.
Well, from what we know about it, it's a large aircraft. It may not quite be a classic fighter. It may be more like a somewhere between a fighter and a bomber in its roles. It will be a lot of very sophisticated technology has been developed for it. It's got completely new engines, which are somewhat different from any jet engine we've seen before in production. And one thing we do know about it is it's going to be extremely expensive. So I think it's going to be the kind of system that the cost will rule it out for export, 10% plus, 10% minus, or whatever.
How much would you estimate?
It's been suggested that it is somewhere up around perhaps 250 to 300 million per unit, which is more than twice the F-35 cost.
Well, perhaps, Alan, you can all club together and get one. Would Canada want an F-47?
As Bill just said, I think those kinds of costs would rule it out for us, probably.
Alan Williams and Bill Sweetman, thank you both very much. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Till next week, then, goodbye.
The other day, the first general concept of military defense, I quote its name, of the country in the modern history of the Federal Republic of Germany was presented. It was revealed to the world personally by the German Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius. We have familiarized ourselves with what was available in the public space. Upon reading the available interpretations of the document, born in the depths of the department headed by him, a doubt arises that its authors and the minister himself are of sound mind and firm memory. I want to say that in this case, this is not a figure of speech. That is how it is. These are indeed already questions of medicine. We have, of course, grown somewhat accustomed over the past years to the irresponsible statements and absurd actions of the Berlin Camarilla. However, this case is, as they say, special and close to clinical, inasmuch as it represents a vivid relapse of German military political feeble-mindedness. Over the last 300 years, they have learned nothing on the spree, as we see from the presented concept. The rulers in Berlin change. Now Kaisers come, then Führers, then chancellors with presidents, but Russia remains, as before, the main and only threat. No, here is what is most important. Not for the German people, not for the citizens of Germany, but for those who are periodically brought to power in Berlin by those who finance them, sponsor them from other countries and regions of the world. The priority task is formulated as inflicting a strategic defeat upon our country, as they have devised there. It is also stated there how one should prepare for all of this. Whatever you call it, whether a concept or Plan Barbarossa, there is no creativity. The trends, narratives, as they like to say, patterns, that's another word they use, are the same. They're all the same, and the arguments are old. It turns out that Russia is again seriously, you won't believe it, threatening them because we will certainly, as they suppose and formulate in their concepts, attack them. Now we will know. Perhaps we really should somehow wonder what is happening with those who write such things. Let us remind them how for more than 30 years, our country called upon both official Berlin and various representatives of the German political establishment, of course, German business, all these NGOs, non-profit organizations, and the media of the Federal Republic of Germany. To what did we call? To have a falling out, or to compete over who can inflict more strategic defeats on whom? Perhaps we propose they compete in threats? No, we called upon them to jointly build a unified security system from the Atlantic to the Urals, or, for example, from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Any forms of interaction, cooperation, with the possibility even of friendship. We called for building a common economic, humanitarian, and cultural space. We've done everything we could. And, what is most interesting, it is organized differently in different countries. All these materials, statements, speeches, interviews and articles, messages and comments, over all these years are available on our Ministry of Foreign Affairs' website. Moreover, they are available both in Russian and translated into the main world languages. Read them, you will see that it is the truth. Alas, current German and EU politicians are not on friendly terms with such complex matters. It is much easier to endlessly accuse, insult Russia, and threaten to invent tall tales. All because our country conducts its own foreign and domestic policy, preserves historical memory, wants to be friends, but at the same time remembers the difficult pages of the past. Not in order to make the future dependent on them, but so that in the future we do not altogether commit those very mistakes that cost us all so dearly. They are also taking revenge on us because we were providentially right when we said that the entry of countries neighboring us into NATO and dragging them into a certain Euro-Atlantic space is not for the strengthening of security or the development of their industry and civilian infrastructure. No, it is in order to build them into anti-Russian ranks. That is what we are now also being threatened and revenged for. You know, I want to say that we have a strong historical memory. War has come to us from the West at least once a century. We remember how all of that ended. We remember well how the eastward advancement of the borders of the Third Reich ended for our people. And what is most interesting, we remember how it ended for them as well. If they have forgotten in Berlin, they can have a read. We have many historical materials, including those translated into the German language. However, Merz and Associates have gone further than their ancestors. They do not intend, as we now see, to limit themselves to the Eastern territories. They dream of ensuring security in North and West Africa, though the Third Reich looked in there too. They need the Sahel. The Middle East is also a zone of their interests. And they have also gathered to counteract a certain, as they formulate it, Russian activity in the Indo-Pacific region, promising to stand there in defense of sea routes and communications, as they put it. One wants to ask the question, did anyone ask? Perhaps somewhere before this they managed to provide security, or is there some kind of successful experience in applying such zeal? No, they didn't ask. And there is no such experience. But still, one wants to ask this question and formulate it in the following way. What has Germany forgotten in the Pacific Ocean? Just curious. Maybe they dug some kind of underground tunnel that connects Berlin with the Pacific Ocean. I know nothing about this, but maybe this is from the latest developments of German scientists and industry, which has now, truth be told, thinned out, having departed due to the disastrous state of the German economy. Maybe it would be better for the Germans to start by putting things in order in their own home. There are many problems there. Maybe they should repair the bridges, make it so that the trains finally run on schedule. Or maybe they should focus on their own culture. Or maybe they should develop theatrical arts. Somehow support, by the way, the small peoples, non-indigenous, but representing the variability of the national segment in Germany. Develop the languages of minorities on the territory of the Federal Republic of Germany. Or, for example, start translating official documents published by the Berlin officialdom into Turkish and Arabic, so that the citizens of Germany could understand them better. There is plenty of room for activity. One can, so to speak, really spread their wings. And by the way, perhaps they should invest their capabilities in medical services in Germany. But no, in Berlin there are other plans. The priority is the transformation of the Bundeswehr into the strongest army in Europe. I am just curious. It seems the strongest army in Europe had already been designated, and Zelensky told everyone about it. By the way, in Berlin they listened and applauded him when he said that it was specifically the Ukrainian armed forces. How will they manage with the competition there? In aggregate, it is planned to increase the size of the German army to almost 500,000 people. The figure given is 460,000. A large-scale rearmament program has been adopted. The military-industrial complex is being pumped with money. The main newsmakers are the heads of defense concerns, whose appetites grow with each passing day. And no wonder when hundreds of billions of euros are at stake, and outside the window, an economic crisis in Germany. Ahead of everyone is the notorious Rhine metal. By the way, it is not German at all. In reality, it is controlled by American capital. Its main shareholder is the well-known BlackRock, the head of whose German branch from 2016 to 2020, quite accidentally, it just so coincided, was the current Chancellor of Germany, Merz. An interesting accidental coincidence. Maybe it's not about Russia. Maybe, finally, the citizens of Germany will be given to understand that it's not about us, but about the insatiable appetites of those who run these super-mega financial, military, political giants, which have fused together and turned private business into some kind of scary, monstrous conglomerates that are killing the German economy at its roots. The same was done by Merz's compatriot, Ursula von der Leyen. True, she did this not with weapons. She did it with pharma, with medical drugs during the pandemic. What I mean is that there was a fusion of interest between the largest companies and, so to speak, the political, it's impossible to call it will, manipulation that was carried out not in the interests of the citizens of the European Union, and certainly not in the interests of the citizens of Germany, but in the interests of those who profited from it. And we're talking, I think, not just billions, but trillions of euros. Now, her compatriot Merz is repeating the same trick. Therefore, let us once again try to ask the question, maybe it is not our country that threatens the Germans. Maybe the German political elite threatens the Germans because it has become cramped within the framework of the Treaty on the Final Settlement with respect to Germany of 1990, also known as the 2+4 Treaty. It does not allow for making real money. And Russia is simply a motive, an excuse, and in general, historically, stands as a bone in the throat. In Berlin, they have somewhat forgotten how such cultivation of hatred toward Russians and toward Russia, under the pretext of an imaginary threat emanating from it, inevitably ended for the Germans. But we remember, and we will remind them of it, once again worthily celebrating May 9th, the day of our great victory.
These young recruits grew up in a country that had abandoned national service. Soon, many of those born in 2008 may have to embrace it. In a few weeks, a generation of young Germans will receive a letter asking if they're prepared to serve in the military. Females do not have to respond. Males must. Those who agree will enter the armed forces in 2027. Marty Dorman is an 18-year-old student who coaches at his local football club in his spare time. While he won't be getting an official letter, he says he wouldn't serve anyway.
Right now, I don't feel ready to go to the army, because I don't understand why I should be dragged into these political crises, into the violent fantasies of others by politicians.
When Parliament passed the decisive vote a few weeks ago, thousands of young people took to the streets to show their disapproval. But a glance at the latest opinion polls suggests that not everyone sees things that way. Nearly half of those under 30 support voluntary national service. Among the over 30s, that number rises to 54%. But it's a different picture if the national service is mandatory. Nearly 2/3 of those under 30 oppose it, while amongst those over 30, nearly 2/3 are in favour of it. Perhaps because many of them had to do it themselves. During the Cold War, a form of service to the German state was compulsory on both sides of the old Iron Curtain. The current Chancellor and Defence Minister served as soldiers in what was then West Germany. Now they see national service as part of their plan to resist the perceived threat from Russia.
We have agreed an accelerated procurement and recruitment program for the Bundeswehr using the following logic. We must be so strong that no one attacks us. In other words, we must pose a credible threat to deter potential aggressors.
No post-war chancellor has previously spoken so clearly of the need to rearm. Such is the lingering legacy of the Nazis or National Socialists. Now it is national service that is uppermost in ministers' minds. And that means putting more young Germans into uniform if needs be. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
Don't miss out, get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.
German soldiers are training for the worst case, an attack on NATO territory. It's a threat the Western military alliance sees as very real, with Russia waging war in Ukraine and allegedly attacking critical infrastructure like here in the Baltic Sea. Countries that share a border with Russia want Germany to take more responsibility for Europe's defense.
It's rather blocking than leading.
Plus, Donald Trump is president again. If he cuts US support for Europe's security,
this can create real immediate issues.
So why isn't Germany leading Europe's defense? And who's going to do it instead? This is NATO's biggest exercise in decades, since the end of the Cold War. It's called Steadfast Defender, a chance for all NATO members to showcase their combined military might. NATO's 32 member countries are bound by a promise of collective security to defend each other in case of an attack. And right now, the alliance sees its biggest threat right on its doorstep. From Russia. This is Russian territory Kaliningrad, right between Poland and Lithuania. And then there is Russia's close ally, Belarus.
Danger is moving towards us at full speed. We must not look the other way. We must face it.
That's why many of these NATO drills are taking place in Europe's northeast, like here in Norway. Or here in Lithuania. That's the location for the finale of this whole exercise. And Germany is leading it. The point is to practice a crucial process, moving troops and equipment from Germany to the potential front line quickly, via this route, or this, or these. With its location at the center of Europe, Germany is a major hub for NATO, and would play a central logistical role if Russia attacked a NATO member. In recent years, Germany has significantly boosted its defense spending. It's also Europe's biggest provider of military aid to Ukraine, by far. Maybe not surprising for the largest economy in Europe. Still, sounds like a leader, right? Well,
a lot of work needs to be done here to decrease dependencies, decrease vulnerabilities.
This is Ulrike Franke, an expert on German and European defense policy. She says Germany and Europe's military capabilities need to be much, much stronger.
So at this point, Europe remains concerningly dependent on the United States, militarily speaking.
Let's have a look at what that means. Firstly, Europe relies on the US military industry for much of the equipment it needs to buy. The US far outpaces European countries when it comes to producing large quantities of weapons and ammunition. Then there are the US nuclear warheads stationed in Europe, around 100, providing protection through deterrence. Plus, around 100,000 US troops on the continent, along with their fighter aircraft, tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery. Around a third of those troops are stationed in Germany, at these key locations. Like here, the US military's European Command Headquarters, and the US Air Force's European HQ. Guaranteeing Europe's security has been in the US interest for a long time. And for more than 75 years, the central structure to do so has been through the NATO alliance. Enter Donald Trump. He's been complaining the US is paying too much for Europe's security. And he's even threatened not to protect allies who don't meet NATO's defense spending targets, currently at 2% of GDP. That would call into question NATO's core principle of collective defense.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, no, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
And now Trump's called for NATO members to up their defense spending to 5% of GDP. The US currently has the biggest military of all NATO members. It has around 1.3 million active duty personnel. Just for comparison, Germany has around 180,000. The US also has the most sophisticated equipment and intelligence.
And importantly, it's not just a question of quantity, but also of quality, in the sense that there are several military capabilities that NATO only has because the United States has it. We call those strategic enablers. Hence, if the US withdraws or just kind of decides to be less involved in NATO, this can create real immediate issues.
So why is Europe and why is Germany so dependent on the US for its security? Guess what? It has a lot to do with history. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. Soon after, World War II was over, with more than 60 million dead, on the battlefield and as victims of German atrocities. The Nazis killed many millions of Jews, people with disabilities, Sinti and Roma, homosexuals, and many other persecuted groups. Germany was split into 4 zones of occupation, controlled by the victorious Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. And Berlin, right in the middle of the Soviet sector, was also split in 4. After the atrocities of World War II, the Allies initially decided Germany should never again be trusted with arms or troops. So the German military was disbanded and the country demilitarized. Instead, the Allies stationed their own troops in their zones. Soon, 2 Germanys were established: the Federal Republic of Germany, a democracy aligned with the West, and the German Democratic Republic, a communist dictatorship dependent on the Soviet Union. But then tensions grew between the US and the Soviet Union. The border between the 2 Germanys became the front line of the Cold War. Rearmament was now on the agenda, both in East and West Germany. But it's the West we'll focus on, because we're talking about the role of the US. In 1955, with US backing, West Germany established its new military force, meant for defense only. The idea of rearming Germany was controversial. Just 10 years after the end of the war, many in Europe thought Germany still should not have its own military. And many Germans thought so too. But West Germany upped its defense spending. Young men were now required to do military service. West Germany also joined NATO, ensuring the Bundeswehr was integrated into the Western military alliance. But it was still very reliant on the US, which increased its military presence in Europe during the Cold War. In 1961, the GDR, so East Germany, started building the Berlin Wall. And soon after, tensions reached a peak, a face-off between US and Soviet tanks on the streets of Berlin. Fast forward a few decades and everything changed. The Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell, and the two Germanys were reunited.
There was an overall feeling in the West, and one that was particularly embraced in Germany, that now geopolitical competition had ended and that military competition and military confrontation was a thing of the past.
Reunification was a priority, and Germany saw itself surrounded by friends. Many Germans saw no need for a strong military, and its neighbors didn't want that either. Eventually, conscription was suspended. German troops joining international missions often played supporting or training roles.
It's okay. For Germany, military power became a thing that was just not relevant anymore, and in fact was seen quite negatively.
With defense spending cut, the Bundeswehr fell into quite a dire state. It started making headlines like these. A mass breakdown of tanks? And training not with machine guns, but broomsticks? But then this happened. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Wir erleben eine Zeitenwende. Und das bedeutet, die Welt danach ist nicht mehr dieselbe wie die Welt davor.
And it was that
Zeitenwende.
Or turning point that set in motion major changes. Germany's relationship with Russia used to look like this. For years, German governments had been building friendly trade ties with Russia. The German economy was fueled by cheap Russian gas. The war in Ukraine meant all that was over. And it completely changed Germany's attitude to defense. The government announced a one-off special fund, 100 billion euros, to get the Bundeswehr up to scratch. Since then, Germany has modernized its arsenal, upgrading air defense systems, building tanks, ordering F-35 fighters, and helicopters. It's also been upping its game in Europe. Germany has spent billions on military aid to Ukraine. That's a big change, since Germany was mocked for just sending helmets shortly before Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Plus, Germany is setting up a military base in Lithuania. Over the next couple of years, a brigade of tanks and almost 5,000 personnel will be stationed there. It's the first time ever the Bundeswehr will post such a big unit outside of Germany permanently. All that is set to help strengthen NATO's eastern flank. And Germany is finally meeting NATO's 2% defense spending target. But 3 years after Scholz announced the Zeitenwende, it's clear that it will take more than a little spring cleaning to fix the German military's problems. Even Germany itself says so. In 2024, a government report found that the military was aged and shrinking and severely lacked equipment. All that is causing concern for Germany's partners, especially those closer to Russia's border.
I think that across the region, especially in the northeastern flank, everyone sees right now that Germany is very much focused on itself.
Justyna Gotkowska is a Polish researcher on the German Bundeswehr, NATO and European defense. She says Germany has a lot more to do.
Curtailing bureaucracy, on implementing modernization plans, on gaining more people to serve in the Bundeswehr.
Recently, German politicians have talked about reintroducing conscription. But even that won't solve the problem.
There is a big question mark with regard to future funding and future financing of the German armed forces.
Germany's established parties might agree on boosting defense capabilities further. But no one really seems to know where to get the money from. Plus, defense spending is a divisive issue within Germany. Some people don't see Russia as a threat to Germany and think the support for Ukraine goes too far. Populist parties are campaigning on that idea and winning votes with it. All that affects the way Germany behaves on the European level.
Germany is still struggling with this role of leader or kind of unifying force within Europe.
This whole thing about Germany not seeing itself as a leader, that's a big part of its post-war identity. And that's visible now in Germany's approach to Ukraine's defense. It's reluctant to lead the way, prefers to act as part of an alliance.
Hier an dieser Stelle ist es mir ganz wichtig, dass wir eine breitere europäische Unterstützung hinbekommen. Es kann nicht alleine an Deutschland hängen.
Scholz has warned against Germany getting too involved in the war. He set limits, like refusing to send long-range Taurus missile systems to Ukraine.
The Germany under Chancellor Scholz has a very cautious, reactive and reluctant stance towards the Russian war against Ukraine, and it's rather blocking than leading, and needs to be pushed to be more ambitious and to take more risky decisions.
So, from Poland's perspective at least, Germany can't be expected to take the lead. So, who will? Other major players like France and the UK don't look set for that role either. They're Europe's only nuclear powers, have strong militaries, are big spenders on defense, and key supporters of Ukraine. But France has been mired in political crisis for months. And with the UK now out of the EU, it doesn't have a strong claim to leadership in Europe. Instead, it's other countries taking the most action right now. Let's have a look at this chart. It shows the percentage of GDP that NATO members spent on defense in 2014. And estimates for 2024. These are the countries that have seen the most dramatic increase in defense spending over the last 10 years. Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland. What do they all have in common? Right, they all share a border with Russia. Remember, here is Russia's Kaliningrad, and here is Belarus. The Baltic states were occupied by the Soviet Union for decades, and along with Finland and Poland, they've long warned the West of the threat posed by Russia. And they fear they could be Russia's next target after Ukraine.
We are the countries now that are faced with Russian aggressive actions, hybrid ones, with regard to pressure on our border.
And it shows. Poland is planning to spend 5% of GDP on defense this year, more than even the US. The Baltic and Nordic states too have invested massively into their militaries. But not just that, some of them have reinstated conscription. And they are preparing civilians for a military attack. Sweden sent this booklet to 5 million households, explaining what to do if war comes. Poland, as well as the Baltic states, announced plans to fortify their borders with Russia and Belarus.
But it doesn't matter whether the Baltic states increase their defense spending and their capabilities by 200% or 3,000 if you want. The sheer size of their countries and their economies doesn't match, well, France and Germany, for example. And so you need the big countries. You need France, you need Germany, you need the United Kingdom.
Germany has pledged to ramp up its military capabilities. But as we've seen, there are many factors holding it back. such as the country's history, its reliance on the US, and the question of financing. All that makes it unlikely that Germany will be leading Europe's defense anytime soon.
This is one of the major reasons why Germany's far-right AfD has been locked out of power.
Brandmauer.
The Brandmauer, or firewall, is the unwritten agreement that political parties do not work with the Alternative for Germany party because they say they are too extreme. But as the AfD has grown in popularity, pressure has been building to scrap the firewall. Pressure from outside.
There's no room for firewalls.
And pressure from within.
The firewall is the biggest load of nonsense.
Before we look at how we got here and why it matters, we need to answer some other questions. Like why? The firewall is rooted in Germany's experience with Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Party, or the Nazis. In the 1930s, Hitler came to power with the support of conservative politicians who mistakenly believed they could contain him. After the Allies' victory over the Nazis, Germany's post-war leaders had learnt the lesson.
Damals galt dann unter den historischen Umständen.
The idea was that anti-fascists of all stripes had to work together to prevent the disaster of that regime from being perpetuated or repeated.
Nicht zu perpetuieren oder gar zu wiederholen.
So why is the AfD behind the firewall? The AfD began in 2013 as an economically liberal anti-Euro party. They underwent a radical change around 2015, adopting a more nationalist position and rhetoric. They ran campaigns that warned of Islam, employed dog whistle, sometimes racist stereotypes. Senior figures downplayed Germany's culture of remembrance and its confrontation with Nazi crimes. Around that time, the conservative CDU party literally wrote down a pledge never to work with the AfD. Germany's security service labelled the AfD as a far-right extremist threat, citing its anti-democratic and nationalist views.
In ihrem Ethos.
In its ethos, it has virtually nothing to do with the values we associate with liberal democracy.
This was the response a high-ranking conservative gave recently when asked why the CDU don't talk to the AfD.
And here in Germany, we do have a party that has many people in their ranks, in their leading ranks, that are pro-Putin, pro-Russian, that are anti-Semites, that are racists.
I put that to Beatrix von Storck of the AfD. She's in charge of breaking down the firewall. The argument made by conservatives is that the AfD, and I'm quoting, by the way, this is that the AfD is a Putin-friendly party that wants to weaken Germany, and that you have anti-Semites and right-wing extremists in your ranks. What are you doing to address that? What do you say to that?
We don't have to say anything about it. You know, they tried this all over the last years. They are still, struggling and changing their strategy towards AfD. I do understand it's very difficult because they basically have to change their politics, the policy. They don't want to do that.
At this stage, you might be wondering, how does the firewall work in practice? German governments are almost always formed by coalitions. The firewall means the other parties rule out governing with the AfD. That applies to all levels of government, including the European Parliament, but it goes further. Look at this. The AfD is the second biggest party in the German Parliament, 150 members, around 20% of the seats. In theory, that means they should get to nominate one of the vice presidents of the Parliament. The AfD should get to chair a fifth of the committees. But in practice, the other parties refuse to vote for the AfD nominees, and this infuriates them.
We could nominate Jesus Christ and Mahatma Gandhi and they wouldn't be voted through.
Jesus Christ certainly wouldn't have been in the AfD.
The firewall also means that other parties don't support AfD motions or amendments, nor do they rely on AfD votes. That's important. So, has the firewall ever been breached? The short answer is yes, and it was a huge deal. Take a look at this photo. In it, we see the AfD and the CDU voting together in January 2025. How did we get here? 1 week earlier, a rejected asylum seeker attacked a group of kindergarten children with a knife. He killed one child and a man who had intervened. It came in the middle of a highly charged election campaign. Merz, then running to be Chancellor, called a vote on a sweeping migration motion. The other Democratic Party said they vote it down. He pressed ahead. The motion passed with the votes of the AfD. It was unprecedented. The AfD were delighted. While Merz insisted it wasn't cooperation, Other parties were irate.
You need to raise the firewall again.
Tens of thousands took to the streets to protest, seemingly unconvinced by Merz's argument that the vote didn't amount to cooperation.
It was a genuine taboo break. Merz was punished for it at the federal election, as far as we can tell from voter surveys.
So what's all the fuss about the firewall collapsing now? It's just emerged that members of the Conservative group in the European Parliament had been part of a WhatsApp group with far-right politicians, including an AfD lawmaker. In it, they worked on legislation to toughen asylum rules, and the AfD hailed it as a historic success. Chancellor Friedrich Merz was not happy.
We disapprove of what apparently took place at the staff level last week.
But the parties on the centre-left and the left have pounced on the news to accuse the Conservatives of betrayal, while the AfD says this cooperation is an important step.
I think this is a process we're going through, and once it's established even more on the European level, this will push the firewall also a bit backwards or down in Germany, and we will end with a coalition. Working together, a process of working together in the very end.
So what's the answer? What can the other political parties do? Remember that graph I showed you at the beginning? Well, the AfD support is especially strong in one region. In the last big elections, they won all but 3 of the East German constituencies outside Berlin. This makes them increasingly hard to ignore.
Auf kommunaler Ebene lässt sich in vielen Bundesländern oder zumindest in den ostdeutschen Bundesländern aber mehr und mehr.
At the local level in many states, especially in the east, you increasingly can't get anything done without the AfD on board. Rejecting a proposal just because the AfD supports it only adds to their mythology.
Bloß weil die AfD ihm beispringt, führt eher dazu, sie weiter zu mythisieren.
The situation led to some soul-searching. A former CDU leader called for a rethink of the firewall, suggesting the CDU could maybe work with the AfD on some common issues. It triggered a huge debate. Chancellor Merz stuck by the firewall, saying the AfD was anti-democratic.
This party has openly declared its intention to destroy the CDU. It wants a different country. That's why the outstretched hand that the AfD keeps holding out is in reality a hand that seeks to destroy us.
Despite those warnings, some lawmakers at the local level are already embarking on a different approach. Luka Pawoda is the mayor of Garz, a town on the Polish border. Frustrated by traditional party politics, he started his own movement, freed from the firewall. 1 in 2 people here voted for the AfD.
We try to keep party politics out of local government because it allows us to work more efficiently and avoid lengthy party debates. People don't want local government to turn into the Bundestag.
Pawoda sits on the city council alongside AfD members. His experience tells him that the way to counter the AfD is not through stigmatisation, but by showing voters that their concerns are taken seriously.
If the SPD-CDU would just take a good look at themselves and really maintain a consistent presence in rural areas, many problems would already be solved and we wouldn't have such strong AfD election results.
So we have a hugely symbolic vote in the German parliament, we have cooperation at the European and communal level, and wider societal pressure. Take all that together and the firewall is crumbling. For the AfD, the strategy is working, chipping away at the old rules and norms, trying to drive a wedge between the Conservative CDU and the other parties. For the CDU, the choice is brutal. Do you hold the course? Pray that you can perform an economic miracle that re-energises the party with the risk of failing and potentially losing even more support? Or do you dismantle the firewall and start working with the AfD? But that could split the party right down the middle, and voters too may just decide to give up on the CDU. Which brings us back to Friedrich Merz. If he is right, it's an existential dilemma that could not only have a profound impact on his Conservative Party, but Germany as we know it.
A German court has sentenced an army officer to 5.5 years in prison for planning a terrorist attack. Prosecutors say the officer posed as a Syrian refugee and targeted multiple politicians. The case shocked Germans and stirred up a debate about the depth of right-wing radicalism in the country's military.
It is the end of one of the most extraordinary cases of far-right terrorism in Germany. Bundeswehr soldier Franco A. has been sentenced to 5.5 years behind bars. His crime? Plotting to conduct a terror attack while posing as a refugee. The court found him guilty of planning attacks on high-ranking German politicians and also of illegally possessing weapons.
The court is convinced that the defendant wanted to commit a politically motivated act of violence. Judges made clear that he also harbored a nationalist and right-wing extremist ideology.
Although the jail sentence was below the more than 6 years that prosecutors had asked for, they called the verdict a major success.
I am quite satisfied with the verdict, despite a lower sentence than the one that we asked for. It is an important success in the fight against right-wing extremism, racism and anti-Semitism in Germany.
Franco A. said he regretted hoarding the weapons, but has consistently denied planning any attacks. For protesters standing in front of the courtroom, this is not an isolated case, but a case that shines a light on far-right extremism in the German military.
Earlier, I spoke to Lorenz Blumenthaler from the Amadeo Antonio Foundation, that's an NGO that monitors far-right extremist activity in Germany, and I asked him what he thought about the court's verdict.
Well, I guess on the one hand, I'm a little relieved, and I mean, it's kind of scary to walk into an office every day that you know about that it has been spied on by a far-right terrorist who has been now also acknowledged by the court plotting crimes against the state and against politicians and my boss. So I actually feel a little safer in my skin now. But then on the other hand, I think that the sentence could have been higher and that especially the investigations cannot stop at that moment, because I think there are far too many open questions that still remain to be answered by.
You were mentioning the open questions there. Sorry, you're mentioning the open questions there. It's interesting. Do you think the authorities have done enough to investigate all the circumstances of Franco A.'s activities?
Not at all. I mean, we have so many open ends. If you follow the case closely, you know that Franco A., for instance, acknowledged that he possessed far more weapons, that he has been in chat groups within the German military where they exchanged further terror plans and plotted so-called Stay X, where they would strike with weapons and kill multiple politicians. And all of these connections, also his connections to Russia, his connections into the AfD, that's something that still remains to be resolved in a way, or at least investigated. And I think we need a different culture within the German military to openly address these questions, because otherwise I think it is very hard to trust the German military if we know, or at least we have to suspect, that there are far-right networks within the German military.
Is this you don't think this is an isolated case? You think it's a problem that goes through the whole of the armed forces?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was the thing that I was most scared about in the verdict, that it would have been treated as just an individual case and not a structural problem within the German military. Because, I mean, due to amazing research done by German newspapers, we know about the Hannibal network, about at least 4 different big chat groups that Franco A. also was a part of, that they met. And all of these people, they are trained on guns, they have access to guns, they prepared safe houses for potential day X, they partly bought storage for potential corpses. And I think all of these questions in a way need to be resolved. I mean, it was clear that it couldn't happen just through this one case, but I think it is kind of remarkable that the international attention towards the case and to Franco A has been much stronger than the German public interest in the case.
Thank you very much, Lorenz Blumenthaler from the Amadeo Antonio Foundation here in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
ARD Sounds.
So, guck mal, Julia, ich habe dir heute was mitgebracht.
Mathis reicht mir Papiere rüber.
Ja, 3 genau.
Das sind mehrere Seiten und es ist vom Kreiswehrersatzamt Arnsberg an dich, Mathis Paul Dierkes.
Gibt es gar nicht mehr, dieses Amt. Also es ist das Ergebnis meiner Musterung von damals. Die hatte ich noch und ist danach dann halt kurz nach mir ausgesetzt worden, die Wehrpflicht. Ja. Nicht wegen mir. Sieht irgendwie alles sehr bürokratisch aus, ne?
Ja, ich sehe auch auf Seite 3, es gefällt mir besonders gut, die genaue Zeitangabe 7:24 bis 8:41. Ja. Sehr deutsch, sehr genau.
Total. Ich weiß nicht mehr ganz genau, was gemacht worden ist. Ich weiß nur noch das Ergebnis T5, also nicht wehrdienstfähig war das Ergebnis, ausgemustert. Ich weiß noch, dass ich glaube, ich beim Hörtest war. Ich weiß, dass einmal so mein Rücken angeguckt wurde, so ein bisschen was abgeklopft. Also eigentlich wie so eine normale Hausarztuntersuchung. Wenn ich mich richtig erinnere, ist es aber nicht ganz bis zum Ende gegangen. Also dieses berüchtigte Hodenabtasten hatte ich, glaube ich, zum Beispiel nicht mehr. Oder hatte ich auf gar keinen Fall, das weiß ich noch. Und dann war ich ja offenbar um 8:41 Uhr durch und ausgemustert.
Du konntest frühstücken gehen.
Ja,
aber so diese Fehlziffern, die man da ankreuzen kann, hin oder her. Also ich habe mir das mal angeguckt und ich habe dann auch gedacht, Moment mal, also mit dem Marschgepäck, irgendwie 30 bis 60 Kilo, ich als zierliche Person, würde mich da, glaube ich, als Ameise fühlen. Also ob das Sinn machen würde, großes Fragezeichen.
So, ihr habt es gerade schon gehört. Die Bundeswehr ist heute unser Thema bei Mal angenommen. Wird ja gerade oder eigentlich schon seit Monaten super viel drüber diskutiert, ne? Über so Fragen wie werden wir in Deutschland stärker? Wie werden wir verteidigungsbereiter? Und wir wollen uns heute mal konkret anschauen, was wäre denn, wenn es wieder eine Musterung und eine Wehrpflicht geben würde, und zwar für uns alle.
Ich bin Julia Nestlin und mir gegenüber sitzt der, T5 ausgemusterte Mathis Dierkes.
Sehr gerne.
Und wir hören und schauen uns jetzt gleich mal unser Szenario an. Aber ich habe hier gerade die Papiere ja noch. Da gibt es lauter so Fehlzahlen. Sag mal, wegen was bist du jetzt eigentlich nochmal rausgefallen?
Ja, komischerweise ist nichts angekreuzt. Nee. Ne? Das hat mich auch gewundert. Ich weiß es nicht mehr genau. Es war irgendeine Mischung aus zu groß, zu leicht und leicht die Wirbelsäule schief. Und damit, weil man, glaube ich, für fast alle dieser Sachen, die man machen kann bei der Bundeswehr, dann schon nicht mehr so richtig in Frage kommt, haben sie gesagt, gehen Sie bitte wieder um 8:41 Uhr.
Ja, das reicht jetzt. Ja. Viel Spaß beim Frühstücken. Also, wir schauen uns jetzt mal unser Szenario an. Was für Szenen könnten sich denn in Zukunft dann so abspielen? Wenn ihr uns mit Video anguckt, dann seht ihr das da, aber sonst, ihr braucht das Video nicht unbedingt. Kann aber Spaß machen, sich diese KI-generierten Videos anzugucken. Also, wir lassen uns mal reinfallen.
Alle Männer und Frauen müssen ab 18 zur Bundeswehr. Die Wehrpflicht ist wieder da. Der Bundestag hat das Grundgesetz geändert und das Recht auf Verweigern abgeschafft. Wer gesund ist, muss dienen. Junge Soldatinnen und Soldaten sind jetzt absoluter Alltag in Deutschland. In 1,5 Jahren beim Bund lernen sie alle, sich zu verteidigen, zu kämpfen und zu schießen. Sie arbeiten aber auch als Technikerinnen, Logistiker oder Sanitäter. Und für alle gilt, das kostet Zeit. Studieren nach dem Abi muss erst mal warten. Der erste richtige Job nach der Ausbildung, das dauert noch. Dafür wirkt die Bundeswehr stärker und Deutschland sicherer. Die Hoffnung ist auch, dass die gemeinsame Erfahrung uns als Gesellschaft langfristig verbindet. Und trotzdem bleibt die Frage, wie gerecht ist das eigentlich?
Ja, wie gerecht ist das eigentlich? Ja. Also mit dieser Gerechtigkeitsfrage beschäftigen wir uns heute auf jeden Fall, weil da geht es ja wirklich, also auch um Frauen, es geht um Männer und dieses Recht auf Kriegsdienstverweigerung wurde abgeschafft.
Total. Mir ist sehr aufgefallen, dieses Bild mitten in der Stadt und überall laufen halt Leute in Uniform rum, unterhalten sich auch teilweise mit so Leuten in Zivil, ne, die einfach im Hoodie rumstehen. Und auch so ein Gedanke, den ich gehabt habe, also die KI-Leute sehen alle sehr jung aus und wenn ich dann so denke, die werden halt wirklich dann mit hoher Wahrscheinlichkeit zur Bundeswehr eingezogen, während halt alle, die so zwischen Anfang der 90er Jahre und dann so roundabout 2007 geboren sind, die sind fein raus.
Ja, so ein bisschen, ne?
Ja.
Also kommt direkt so ein Gefühl von Ungerechtigkeit auf, muss ich ganz ehrlich sagen. Ja. Aber ich finde auch den Gedanken spannend, warum irgendwie dann nicht noch mehr mit reinnehmen. Ne? Also auch Ältere können ja im Kriegsfall in der Logistik oder so total wertvoll sein, wenn es eben um so Stärkedemonstrieren geht, so Backup, ne? Backoffice hinten sozusagen bilden.
Ist ein Gedanke, den besprechen wir nachher auch nochmal. Und bevor wir aber jetzt richtig reingehen, dachte ich, müssen wir vielleicht nochmal wirklich einmal so basic erklären, dass wir hier kein Missverständnis haben in der Folge. Also wir haben ja in Deutschland jetzt gerade schon einen neuen Wehrdienst, der gerade anläuft, gerade startet. Und vielleicht nochmal einmal ganz kurz die Basics dazu. Es ist so, dass alle 18-jährigen Männer und Frauen einen Fragebogen bekommen zur Bundeswehr. Die Männer müssen den ausfüllen, müssen den auch zurückschicken. Für die Frauen ist halt freiwillig, also kann man machen, kann man auch lassen. Und in der nächsten Stufe müssen junge Männer dann auch zur Musterung. Das ist so mal wirklich das Basic, was man eigentlich wissen muss.
Aber es ist ja aktuell keine Pflicht, dann auch den Dienst zu machen. Also ob Bundeswehr oder ein Ersatzdienst, selbst wenn bei der Musterung dann gesagt wird, ja, du passt zu uns.
Genau, das ist in unserem Szenario also wirklich ein entscheidender Unterschied. Wir gehen davon aus, alle müssen zur Bundeswehr, alle müssen da eine Grundausbildung machen, wenn sie halt nicht, wie ich jetzt, ausgemustert worden sind. Dafür hat der Bundestag halt wirklich das Grundgesetz geändert, was ja nicht so leicht geht in Deutschland. Man kann also die Wehrpflicht nicht mehr verweigern und das gilt wirklich für alle. Alle gleich.
Das Ziel der Politik hinter dem neuen Wehrdienst, also jetzt wieder für jetzt, ne, ist, dass die Bundeswehr wieder mehr Soldaten bekommt, damit wir uns eben ja im Ernstfall besser verteidigen können gegen einen Aggressor zum Beispiel, der uns angreifen könnte potenziell.
Genau, und mit wir sind jetzt nicht nur wir in Deutschland gemeint. Es geht ja vor allem darum, dass wir unsere Verpflichtung in der NATO einhalten. Ne? Es ist ja das Verteidigungsbündnis, wo Deutschland mit drin ist, die USA und viele andere Länder auch. Und da gibt es verschiedene Berechnungen und die sagen halt, die Bundeswehr braucht schätzungsweise mindestens 260.000 aktive Soldatinnen und Soldaten, um eben diese Verpflichtung einzuhalten. Und wenn man dann halt guckt, wo wir im Moment stehen, das sind ungefähr 180.000, also ziemlicher Gap.
Jetzt schauen wir nochmal auf unser Szenario. Also 2 Dinge sind in unserem Zukunftswehrpflichtszenario ja anders als mit dem jetzigen neuen Wehrdienst. Wir haben im Szenario eben die Wehrpflicht und die gilt auch für Frauen. Im Moment können nach dem Grundgesetz nur Männer zum Wehrdienst verpflichtet werden. Und wenn wir jetzt nur mal das Ziel nehmen, dass wir mehr Sicherheit wollen, dann klingt es doch so, dass uns die Wehrpflicht dabei helfen wird. In unserem Szenario auch. Also einfach nur von den Zahlen her gedacht. Also dann könnten ja viel mehr Menschen einfach da sein, die eine Grundausbildung bei der Bundeswehr haben und die dann platt gesagt mal eine Waffe in der Hand hatten und damit einfach umgehen können.
Ja, ich finde, der Gedanke liegt schon wirklich sehr auf der Hand. Aber wenn man dann mal genauer reinguckt, dann merkt man schon, das mit dem Wehrdienst und automatisch mehr Sicherheit ist schon ein bisschen tricky. Also ich habe eine Studie gefunden vom Institut der deutschen Wirtschaft. Die haben sich das genauer angeguckt und die haben dann am Ende wirklich mehrere Probleme aufgelistet. Wenn man mal so durchgehen, das erste Problem ist, die Bundeswehr ist zumindest jetzt gerade im Moment überhaupt nicht auf so viele Wehrdienstleistende eingerichtet. Ne? Also wir haben halt jedes Jahr ungefähr 650.000 Leute, die 18 werden. Und klar, ne, die landen jetzt natürlich nicht alle wirklich bei der Bundeswehr.
Das ist schnell gelöst, das Problem.
Genau, weil es natürlich weiter Leute gibt wie mich, die ausgemustert werden. Aber es könnte halt trotzdem dann sehr schwierig werden mit zum Beispiel dem Platz in den Kasernen. Ne? Es gibt halt ja da bestimmte Möglichkeiten. Du hast halt so und so viele Schlafplätze, du hast so und so viele einfach Möglichkeiten da, die Leute zu betreuen und auszubilden. Das ist halt begrenzt. Und das könnte halt schwierig werden. Dann natürlich das Problem, du hast überhaupt nicht genug Ausbilderinnen und Ausbilder. Da müsste man erstmal die neu ausbilden. Und aktuell sieht es halt auch so aus, dass die meisten, die dann wehrpflichtig sind und diese Grundausbildung machen, nach dem Wehrdienst gar nicht mehr weitermachen wollen. Auch so eine Sache, an die man halt denken sollte.
Also die wenigsten sagen dann nach der Grundausbildung, hey, fand ich super, ich kann mir vorstellen, jetzt Berufssoldat zu werden.
Ja, und da sind wir bei dem Punkt. Wir haben ja wirklich eben das Ziel, so und so viele aktive Soldatinnen und Soldaten zu haben, also wirklich Leute, die beruflich Soldaten sind und nicht nur die Grundausbildung machen. Und in dieser Studie wird dann sogar auch davor gewarnt, dass es für uns mit der Wehrpflicht am Ende sogar in Deutschland unsicherer werden könnte. Da fragt man sich erstmal, Moment mal, mehr Leute, man steckt irgendwie mehr Ressourcen rein, wie kann das eigentlich sein? Aber die Erklärung ist halt, die Bundeswehr steckt dann sehr viel Zeit, Energie, Ressourcen rein, um den Leuten wirklich die Basics beizubringen, ne? In diesen wahrscheinlich 9, 12 oder 15 Monaten Grundausbildung, wie auch immer man das genau macht. Und dann hauen die Leute, jetzt mal platt gesagt, danach aber alle wieder ab, wollen mit der Bundeswehr gar nichts mehr zu tun haben und machen halt nicht weiter. Und die Ressourcen, die fehlen dann aber, um halt Berufssoldatinnen und Soldaten zu trainieren oder halt auch, ne, bei modernen Waffen stärker zu werden, bei Drohnen zum Beispiel und was halt noch wichtig ist. Und am Ende ist dann halt das Fazit dieser Studie, eine Wehrpflicht wie in unserem Szenario überfordert die Bundeswehr, zumindest erstmal auf absehbare Zeit, und gibt uns dann halt im Zweifel nur so eine Scheinsicherheit. Und der Appell von denen in der Studie ist halt, am Ende lieber die Bundeswehr attraktiver machen als eine Wehrpflicht wie in unserem Szenario.
Okay, damit die Leute halt freiwillig kommen und hoffentlich auch bleiben, wenn ich es richtig verstehe.
Ganz genau.
Okay, aber was passiert in unserer Gesellschaft und unserem Szenario? Finden wir die Wehrpflicht dann alle gut so gesellschaftlich oder gibt es große Demos, große Gegenbewegungen, lange Diskussionsshows im Fernsehen und ein großes Ungerechtigkeitsgefühl? Ist ja auch eine Frage.
Das ist eine sehr wichtige Frage und wenn wir so auf die Umfragen, die es gibt, gucken, dann kann man schon sagen, die Mehrheit in Deutschland denkt, dass ein stärkeres Militär wichtig ist. Ne? So, das ist erstmal gesetzt, Punkt. Aber wie das passieren soll, wie wir da hinkommen sollen, da gibt es so vor allem zwischen den Generationen schon super unterschiedliche Meinungen, muss man sagen. Und auch in unserem Szenario wird es so sein, dass natürlich verschiedene Menschen weiter verschiedene Meinungen dazu haben. Also diese Diskussion darum, ob es gerecht ist, dass in unserem Szenario alle 18-Jährigen ab einem bestimmten Jahrgang, Männer, Frauen, komplett gleich, alle dazwischen und außerhalb irgendwie 1,5 Jahre Wehrdienst machen, die wird ziemlich wahrscheinlich auch weitergehen, ja.
Und klar ist auf jeden Fall aus aktuellen Umfragen, einmal haben wir 2/3 der älteren Menschen ab 60, die fordern eine Wehrpflicht für Jüngere. Und junge Menschen auf der anderen Seite lehnen die aber zu einem ähnlich starken Teil auch deutlich ab. Da können wir auch sagen, gut 2/3 der 18- bis 28-Jährigen sagen, no, wollen wir nicht. Und insgesamt fand ich noch interessant bei dieser Statistik, sind Frauen kritischer gegenüber dieser Wehrpflicht als Männer. Und eine reine Männerwehrpflicht findet aber die Mehrheit aller jungen Menschen auch klar ungerecht. Ja. Also da gibt es irgendwie verschiedene Dinge, die gleichzeitig wahr sind. Und wenn überhaupt, wünschen die meisten ein geschlechtsneutrales System. Wie es auch unser Szenario ja hat, ne? Muss man sagen, in dem Sinne Gerechtigkeitspunkt für unser Szenario.
Wenn wir bei diesem Punkt Frauen noch mal ein bisschen genauer reingehen, also wir haben ja in Deutschland gerade nicht umsonst ein System, das eben Frauen nicht verpflichtet. Also da haben sich natürlich die Leute, die das Grundgesetz geschrieben haben, zum Beispiel auch Gedanken dabei gemacht. Wenn man das jetzt ändern würde, ist ja die Frage, was würde das für die Gerechtigkeit genau bedeuten? Das haben wir mal eine Expertin gefragt, nämlich Katrin Groh, Juraprofessorin in München. Und sie sagt, Frauen sind halt bis heute strukturell benachteiligt, weil sie oft zum Beispiel Zusatzjobs für die Gesellschaft übernehmen.
Das führt dazu, dass Frauen viel mehr unbezahlte Care-Arbeit machen, ihre Karriere knicken, wenn sie Kinder bekommen, damit weniger verdienen und hinterher auch weniger Rente bekommen. Wenn Frauen jetzt noch einen Wehrdienst leisten müssen, würde ihnen das nochmal Zeit wegnehmen und gegenüber Männern nochmal zusätzlich benachteiligen.
Ja, also wenn unsere Gesellschaft in unserem Szenario ein total fortschrittliches Frauenbild hätte, ne? Elternzeit für alle problemlos irgendwie akzeptiert, möglich ist, lange stillen vielleicht sogar bezahlt wird, das, dann sieht es vielleicht doch nochmal anders aus vom Gerechtigkeitsgefühl. Ne?
Ja, also da merken wir schon beim Punkt Gerechtigkeit, haben wir noch offene Fragen. Aber du hast ja auch gerade schon gesagt, eine Mann-Frau ist so das eine, aber dann noch das Thema Generationen. Unterschiede. Das ist ja auch ein Punkt, wo man, glaube ich, noch einiges klären müsste.
Ja, und unabhängig von den paar Jahrgängen, in denen der Wehrdienst dann ausgesetzt war, also nach dir dann, ne? Ja. Den Gedanken hatte ich auch in der Recherche, was wäre eigentlich, wenn irgendwie alle einen Dienst leisten müssten. Also auch Leute zum Beispiel, die jetzt in Rente gehen. Ne? Sagt, okay, ihr sollt auch noch mal gucken, ob ihr da nicht helfen könnt, sollt. Es gibt Hinweise aus der Forschung, dass soziales Engagement im Alter sehr, sehr positiv wirkt. Ne? So auch gesundheitlich, es hält fit, gibt dem Alltag einen Sinn und fördert die Gesundheit. Und laut der Foundation for the Rights of Future Generations könnte so ein generationenübergreifendes Dienstmodell, ne, 18-Jähriger und irgendwie 67-Jähriger, dienen zusammen, theoretisch für alle ein Gewinn sein. Das sagen die in dieser Studie. Aber, und das ist, finde ich, schon ein großes Aber, nur weil Engagement gesund ist, heißt es ja noch lange nicht, dass ein staatlicher Zwang für Senioren dann auch funktioniert und irgendwie wir alle gut finden. Das ist total tricky irgendwie einzuschätzen. Es gibt nämlich auch einfach keine einzige Studie, die wirklich belegt, dass eine Dienstpflicht für Menschen im Rentenalter in der Praxis machbar oder sinnvoll wäre, weil macht ja keiner, ne? Also
Ja, weil es natürlich auch einfach in der Realität dafür kein Vorbild oder Beispiel bisher gibt. Ne? Also die Forschenden, die darüber jetzt nachgedacht haben, die finden aber trotzdem, eine Wehrpflicht für Jung und Alt wäre am Ende am gerechtesten. Die Juristin Katrin Groh, die wir vorhin schon mal gehört haben, sieht es komplett anders.
Ich gehöre noch zu den letzten Boomern, ne? Also ich habe da tatsächlich eine Meinung zu. Gerade die älteren Menschen ab 65, 67 haben im Prinzip das ganze Leben dafür gesorgt, dass Deutschland weiterhin ein Sozialstaat, eine Wohlstandsgesellschaft bleibt und den wohlverdienten Ruheabend dann umzumodulieren zu einer Dienstpflicht, zu der viele wahrscheinlich körperlich gar nicht mehr fähig sind, das halte ich nicht für gerecht. Also die eine Generation hat der Gesellschaft gegeben und irgendwann darf sie dann auch Pause machen.
Das machen sie nicht, sich auf die faule Haut legen, aber auf der anderen Seite ist halt auch nicht wahr, dass sie alle super hyper engagiert sind. Also das stimmt auch nicht so ganz. Bei den 65- bis 74-Jährigen macht gut jeder Dritte ein Ehrenamt. Finde ich es nicht viel, aber auch nicht wenig irgendwie so. Und klar, viele unterstützen ihre eigene Familie, zum Beispiel in der Pflege von Angehörigen. Das sind laut Studien des Deutschen Zentrums für Altersfragen grob jeder Vierte oder Fünfte, also schon auch nochmal ein Teil. Aber da muss man schon sagen, das ist ja private Hilfe, ne? Und kein öffentlicher Dienst für die Gesellschaft.
Ja, kann man auch wieder darüber streiten.
Ja.
Indirekt ist es natürlich trotzdem auch ein Dienst für die Gesellschaft. Ne? Also es gibt unterschiedliche Meinungen dazu, glaube ich, kann man sagen. Also was man auf jeden Fall festhalten kann, knapp die Hälfte der Menschen in Deutschland ab 16 sagt jetzt schon, dass sie unter bestimmten Bedingungen bereit sind, freiwillig in die Bundeswehr zu gehen und Deutschland im Falle eines Angriffs zu verteidigen. Auch das ist ja schon mal eine Aussage.
Ja, und das könnte sich in unserem Szenario schon auch geändert haben, je nachdem, wie sich unsere Welt um uns rum verändert hat. Es gibt auch eine aktuelle Studie im European Journal of International Security und die zeigt, je näher wir Kriege erleben und je näher sie an uns ranrücken, gefühlt oder tatsächlich, desto höher ist die Wahrscheinlichkeit, dass Befragte sagen, ja, ich würde für mein Land kämpfen. Also es ist auch so eine Gefühls- und Wahrnehmungssache. Und das sieht man auch in anderen Ländern, zum Beispiel wie Finnland. Da ist ja die Zustimmung zu einer Wehrpflicht relativ hoch. Und das kommt natürlich auch dadurch, dass die Menschen sich vom Nachbarn Russland noch mal näher bedroht fühlen.
Im Moment ist es jedenfalls so, dass in Deutschland bei uns die meisten es fairer finden, wenn sie selber entscheiden dürfen, was sie machen. Ne? Ob jetzt bei der Bundeswehr wirklich eine Grundausbildung zu machen oder ob man im Krankenhaus oder in einem Altenheim oder beim THW hilft, gibt es ja 1000 Möglichkeiten, weil dann eben jeder und jede das machen kann, was er oder sie gut kann. Und dann unterstützen eben auch sehr viele Leute diese Idee. Das sind wirklich 80%, die eben diese Wahlfreiheit besser finden als alle müssen zur Bundeswehr.
Ja, wir haben uns mal angeguckt, wie die Welt dann aussehen würde. Also fast die Hälfte von denen, die nicht zur Bundeswehr wollen, die würde in den Wald oder in die Natur gehen. Etwa jeder Dritte würde eher so Kindergarten oder mit Jugendlichen arbeiten wollen oder was mit Bildung. Und einige sehen sich eben auch, ne, Feuerwehr, schön in dicken Anzügen beim Technischen Hilfswerk und einige weniger auch in der Pflege. Aber das Recht, den Wehrdienst zu verweigern, ne, und alle diese anderen Ersatzdienste zu machen, das muss man nochmal sagen, haben wir jetzt in unserem Szenario festgelegt, gibt es nicht mehr.
Ja. Das stimmt.
Das Grundgesetz muss halt geändert worden sein. Es war bestimmt nicht einfach, aber es wurde geändert in dem Szenario. Und damit gibt es auch keinen Ersatzdienst und eben keine Wahl. Du musst in die Bundeswehr.
Also wenn wir es nochmal zusammenfassen, gesellschaftlich gesehen sorgt die Wehrpflicht in unserem Szenario wahrscheinlich vor allem für Streit zwischen Jung und Alt, weil die eine Seite eben die Wehrpflicht fordert und die andere sie dann machen muss und eben auch gar nicht mehr die Möglichkeit hat, ne, sich dagegen zu wehren und irgendwie einen Ersatzdienst zu machen. Ob das fair ist, dass dann zum Beispiel auch Frauen mit dabei sind, da können wir dann eben auch an dieser Stelle ein großes Fragezeichen dran machen.
Gucken wir nochmal auf diejenigen, die in unserem Szenario auch die Perspektive haben, dass sie diese Pflicht blöd finden. Und Fakt ist, wenn wir diese Sicht ignorieren, dann fühlen die sich nicht ernst genommen. Na, was macht das denn dann mit so einem Demokratieverständnis? Wenn Menschen das Gefühl haben, dass der Staat sie ungerecht behandelt, dann halten sie sich laut Umfragen auch weniger an seine Regeln. Also ein kleiner Backlash könnte dann kommen. In einer Demokratie im Sinne von, wir können gemeinsam entscheiden, ob das Szenario eintritt, sind die Leute eher bereit, für ihr Land im Ernstfall zu kämpfen. Also Menschen wollen, kann man so sagen, Länder verteidigen, deren Werte sie teilen und wo sie mitsprechen können.
Und da finde ich auch wirklich nochmal spannend zu gucken, wie das in Ländern wie Finnland oder Schweden aussieht. Da ist es wirklich so, dass die Menschen in der Mehrheit den Wehrdienst oder die Wehrpflicht wichtig finden und akzeptieren. Also das eigene Land verteidigen zu wollen, das ist für viele Menschen einfach so Teil der eigenen Kultur. Es gehört einfach so mit dazu. Und ein Grund für diese hohe Zustimmung ist auch, dass Frauen da mehr in die Bundeswehren oder da eben die Armeen, wie sie da dann heißen, eingebunden worden sind. Finde ich auch ganz spannend.
Aber wenn wir in unserem Szenario annehmen, dass der Weg zu der Wehrpflicht, ne, in Deutschland jetzt so demokratisch, eine gemeinsame Entscheidung war und das auch alle wirklich so empfinden, ne, dann können wir ja auf Basis von den Umfragen zum aktuellen Modell oder zu aktuellen Modellen sagen, es kann schon gut sein, dass viele die Wehrpflicht akzeptieren, auch wenn sie nicht wirklich eine Auswahl haben.
Ja, aber gleichzeitig kann auch noch was anderes wahr sein, was vielleicht erstmal so ein bisschen widersprüchlich wirkt dazu und auch dazu, dass Leute sich in Anführungszeichen gerne über einen Wehrdienst für die Gesellschaft engagieren. Ne? Also man könnte ja meinen, dass sich die Menschen dann auch über den Dienst hinaus oder danach gesellschaftlich weiter engagieren und das irgendwie auch Teil ihrer Kultur werden lassen. In Schweden haben Forschende das aber nicht nachweisen können. Ne? Das fanden wir auch in der Recherche so ein bisschen schwierig, das zusammenzubringen.
Ja, es können halt immer mehrere Dinge gleichzeitig wahr sein und Menschen können sich da auch so ein bisschen widersprüchlich verhalten. Es deutet nämlich in diesen Forschungen vieles darauf hin, dass so eine militärische Erziehung oder Sozialisation in der Grundausbildung das Vertrauen von Soldatinnen und Soldaten in die Justiz oder Politiker nicht unbedingt stärkt, sondern durchaus auch untergraben kann. Also zum Beispiel kann bei schwedischen Männern ein misstrauisches Gefühl entstehen, weil die Befragten sich wohl auch ungerecht behandelt fühlen. Und zwar, weil sie vielleicht denken, okay, während andere draußen so ihr Leben genießen können, ihren Job anfangen können, irgendwie eine Leidenschaft da draußen finden oder die große Liebe, was auch immer, fühlen sie sich eher oft wie so eine Nummer im System, die Befehle ausführen muss, also nicht so eine große Selbstständigkeit hat. Und auf der einen Seite schweißt das zwar innerhalb der Bundeswehr die Truppe total zusammen, kann aber wohl auch wiederum so mit dem Blick nach außen ganz schön auch für Frust auf Politik und den Staat sorgen.
Tja, was nehmen wir daraus mit? So ein Dienstzwang, der funktioniert nur, wenn die Leute ihn als notwendig und fair wahrnehmen. Ne? Sonst riskieren wir halt, dass das Vertrauen in den Rechtsstaat sinkt oder vielleicht auch sogar weiter sinkt, wenn man es so sagen will. Und eine Pflicht macht uns halt auch nicht automatisch zu engagierten Bürgerinnen und Bürgern. Ne? Also schlechte Erfahrungen können sogar dazu führen, dass wir uns vom Staat abwenden. Und jetzt schauen wir noch drauf, was heißt denn eigentlich eine Wehrpflicht für die Leute, die dann davon betroffen sind und einfach ihr Leben, ne? Ihre Karriere und sogar auch unsere Wirtschaft. Ein Punkt, über den ich vorher auch ehrlich gesagt noch nicht so viel nachgedacht habe.
Was landet eigentlich in unseren Geldbeuteln und so? Das Leibniz-Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung hat sich 3 Szenarien angeguckt. In dem Fall so zwischen 5% der Männer eines Jahrgangs in dem Fall macht Wehrpflicht, bis alle sind dabei. Ja. Und ganz einfach gesagt, je mehr Leute eine Wehrpflicht machen müssen, umso mehr geht an wirtschaftlicher Leistung verloren. Ausschlaggebend ist da wohl, dass wir einmal im Wehrdienst relativ wenig verdienen und das andere ist, dass wir eben ein Jahr raus sind, also von unserem sonstigen Lebensplan einfach mal so abgezwackt wird.
Ich musste halt daran denken, dass sich für den einzelnen Bundeswehr ja aber schon auch wirklich lohnen kann. Ne? Also ich kenne halt wirklich einige Leute, die bei der Bundeswehr waren oder immer noch sind und dann auch wirklich da richtig Karriere gemacht haben. Ne? Die hatten halt noch ihre Wehrpflicht, haben dann die Grundausbildung da gemacht, haben dann da sogar vielleicht studiert, sind weiter aufgestiegen und sind happy damit. Und ich glaube, da kann man schon sagen, dass es sich gelohnt hat für die.
Aber wie du auch gesagt hast, die meisten machen ja Grundausbildung, ne, und dann sind sie raus. Also nicht alle werden Berufssoldaten. Und dann gibt es natürlich bisher Betrachtungen, die sagen, okay, wir haben immer 2 Gruppen. Wir haben die Leute, die den Wehrdienst gemacht haben und wir haben die Leute, die ausgemustert wurden. Und ich denke, man kann es auch auf unser Szenario anwenden oder so extrapolieren, weil es ja auch in unserem Szenario, je nachdem wie streng oder so, auch Leute geben wird, die ausgemustert werden und dann nicht diesen Wehrdienst machen müssen. Also auch in Zukunft gibt es 2 Gruppen, die man miteinander vergleichen kann.
Ja, genau. Wie groß oder klein die jeweils sind, wissen wir nicht genau, aber die wird es weiter geben.
Genau, also wir haben Gruppe A und Gruppe B. Gruppe A hat Wehrdienst gemacht, Gruppe B nicht. So, und die sagen, wenn sie das durchrechnen, wer Wehrdienst geleistet hat, wenn man auf die bisher verfügbaren Zahlen guckt, der hat über das ganze Leben im Vergleich weniger Einkommen, gibt deswegen weniger aus, ne, konsumiert weniger, macht sich in der Wirtschaft bemerkbar und dazu kommt auch, der Einzelne hat dann im Vergleich zu deren, die nicht in den Wehrdienst mussten, weniger Rente und weniger gespart. Also das klingt dann schon unfair, auch wenn wir das auf unser Szenario übertragen.
Aufs ganze Leben gerechnet auf jeden Fall. Und dann gibt es ja auch neben diesem Wehrdienst lohnt sich noch so eine Erzählung, nämlich dass es einigen in Anführungsstrichen ja gut tun könnte oder gut getan hat, sowas wie Disziplin zu lernen oder Verantwortung zu lernen bei der Bundeswehr und danach dann irgendwie ein vielleicht geradlinigeres Leben zu führen oder vielleicht auch einen besseren Job wirklich zu bekommen. Ne? Auch so als eine Erziehungsmaßnahme. Das gibt es ja immer noch auch.
Ja, das, einige von meinen Freunden haben irgendwie damals gesagt, ja, also wahrscheinlich hätte es mir schon gut getan, hinzugehen. Es gibt mehrere Studien, in denen wir dann mal dieses Klischee überprüfen können. Zum Beispiel können wir uns anschauen, was passiert dann mit jungen Männern, die zum Beispiel aus armen Familien kommen, in problematischen Vierteln leben, vielleicht geringe Bildungschancen haben, einer diskriminierenden Minderheit angehören oder auch schon mal kriminell geworden sind und dann einen Wehrdienst machen. Das haben sie sich angeguckt, Forschende. Und die Studie sagt, wer vor der Wehrpflicht kriminell gewesen ist, der wird sich dann während der Wehrpflicht durchschnittlich nicht ändern. Ne? Und bei manchen steigt das Risiko für Straftaten sogar eher, statt dann danach zu sinken. Und also einfach gesagt, ne, wenn man es jetzt mal ganz platt ausdrückt, die machen Wehrdienst, hängen in der Kaserne oft mit ähnlich problematischen Leuten dann vielleicht zusammen, lernen voneinander im Zweifel irgendwie auch noch kriminelle Tricks. Ne? Und das Ergebnis sind dann danach öfter niedriges Einkommen, höhere Arbeitslosigkeit und eventuell sogar auch mehr Straftaten als eben Gleichaltrige ohne Dienst.
Also auch beim Wehrdienst kann man ja wirklich dann zusammenfassend sagen, die Herkunft entscheidet in Deutschland total massiv über Karrierechancen und das ist auch wieder ein Beispiel dafür, wo sich das möglicherweise nochmal verstärkt.
Ja, also unmittelbar für den Jobeinstieg muss der Wehrdienst für den Einzelnen nicht schlecht sein, können wir so festhalten, aber auf längere Sicht sieht es dann schon anders aus. Also weil ein Jahr Wehrpflicht kostet ja dem Staat erstmal viel Geld. Ja. Milliarden können wir sagen, wenn das so ganze Kohorten sind. Und dieses Geld kommt ja von uns allen durch Steuern beispielsweise. So füllt der Staat sein Geldbeutel. Aber egal, ob wir arbeiten oder einkaufen, ne, bei jedem Auto und jedem Brötchen kassiert eben der Staat mit. Und was jetzt die Leute daran schwierig und unfair finden oder wo dann so eine Doppelbelastung reinkommt, auch die Wehrpflichtigen, die müssen ja diese Steuern auf Auto und Brötchen, sag ich mal, zahlen, obwohl sie für den Staat schon mit ihrer Zeit bezahlen und dann auch noch ihr kleines Gehalt haben, geben sie nochmal von ihrem kleinen Gehalt beim Einkaufen direkt wieder Geld zurück an den Staat. Ja. Also so ein richtiger Kreislauf. Und die finanzieren praktisch ihren eigenen Dienst selbst mit. Und am Ende haben sie dadurch über ihr ganzes Leben gesehen, nach Berechnungen und Studien eben deutlich weniger Vermögen auf dem Konto.
Und es gibt ja auch Forschende, die sagen, das alles kann dazu führen, dass Leute weniger in ihre Bildung investieren. Und das wiederum hat dann oft auch nochmal wieder weniger Einkommen zur Folge. Also weniger Menschen schöpfen ihr volles Potenzial aus quasi. Ja, also eine Lose-Lose-Situation.
Kann man schon sagen. Also man spricht da von entgangener Bildung sozusagen. Und was uns diese entgangene Bildung bis Ende des Jahrhunderts schon jetzt kostet, ne? Wehrpflicht mal ausgenommen, Szenario mal kurz ausgeblendet, das hat die Bertelsmann Stiftung erforscht und die kommt auf etwa 2,8 Billionen Euro, die uns jetzt schon verloren gehen.
Eine ziemlich unvorstellbare Zahl, ehrlich gesagt.
Voll. Ja. Und was ich aber noch unvorstellbarer finde oder viel konkreter, jeder 5. Jugendliche steht bei uns ohne vernünftige Ausbildung da. Jetzt schon. Ne? Ja. Und wenn wir jetzt noch eine Wehrpflicht einführen, kommen dann theoretisch nochmal all die Leute dazu, die sich ihr Studium oder ihre Ausbildung potenziell nicht mehr so leisten können oder wollen, wie sie es gerne würden, ja, aufgrund der Verluste wegen Wehrpflicht. Das muss man sagen, ne, auf den Einzelnen gerechnet, aber so, es ist wieder diese große Berechnung. Ne? Wenn man große Kohorten anguckt, dann sieht man eben diese Verluste.
Ja, wenn halt vor allem wirklich fast ein kompletter Jahrgang betroffen ist. Ne? Und ich habe ja am Anfang gesagt schon, auch die Wirtschaft betrifft es. Also auch für Firmen kann die Wehrpflicht wirtschaftliche Nachteile bedeuten. Die Forschung sagt da, junge Leute, die fehlen dann halt potenziell in Berufen, wo sie eigentlich dann jetzt schon viel dringender gebraucht werden und gegebenenfalls vielleicht auch viel besser aufgehoben sind, weil das ihren Interessen entspricht halt.
Ja,
ne?
Und ihren Talenten auch. Ne?
Also Stichwort Fachkräftemangel und so weiter. Auch eine Sache, die sich verschärfen könnte.
Ja, nochmal zusammengefasst, also ökonomisch gesehen ist eine Wehrpflicht den Studien nach ziemlich ungerecht. Junge Menschen tragen fast alle Kosten, ne, und Ältere profitieren dann eher. Ein Pflichtdienst trifft besonders sozial Schwächere und verschlechtert auch potenziell deren Zukunftschancen.
Und das alles kostet uns als Gesellschaft in der Folge viel, sehr, sehr viel. Also man kann sagen, die Wehrpflicht wirkt am Ende nur billiger.
Also Mathis, wir sind am Ende der Folge angekommen. Ja. Was passiert im besten Fall und im schlechtesten Fall in unserem Szenario? Mal angenommen, es tritt der Worst Case ein.
Ja, ich bin heute der Worst Case Mann. Und für mich ist es im Worst Case so, dass wir wirklich sehr, sehr viele unzufriedene junge Menschen in Deutschland haben werden. Viele, die es ungerecht finden und die es überhaupt nicht einsehen, dass sie jetzt wieder einen Pflichtdienst machen müssen. Und vor allem auch, dass sie ja gar nicht auswählen können, was sie für einen Dienst machen. Also du hast vorhin gesagt, viele würden gerne in der Natur einen Job machen, der wichtig ist. Viele würden gerne im Krankenhaus arbeiten, im Altenheim oder mit Kindern. Aber es müssen halt alle, die nicht ausgemustert werden, zur Bundeswehr. Viele haben dadurch auch Nachteile, wenn sie dann später in ihren eigentlichen Job reinstarten wollen, gegenüber halt den Ausgemusterten, die den Dienst nicht machen mussten. Dann haben wir das Thema junge Frauen besprochen. Ne? Junge Frauen sind dann besonders belastet und benachteiligt. Wir haben darüber gesprochen, es gibt unbezahlte Care-Arbeit nach wie vor. Und dann kommt eben noch dieses Pflichtjahr dazu und die Chancengleichheit für alle in der Gesellschaft macht dann nochmal einen großen Rückschritt. Und dann ist eben die Frage, je nachdem, wie wir das Ganze ausgestalten, scheitern wir möglicherweise an unserem wichtigsten Ziel, das ja eigentlich dahinter steckt, nämlich, dass wir alle in Deutschland sicherer sein wollen, vor allem gegenüber Bedrohungen von außen. Und im schlimmsten Fall wird es sogar unsicherer, nämlich unter anderem, weil die Bundeswehr dann ganz viel Arbeit mit diesen ganzen Wehrdienstleistenden hat und auch sehr viel Geld da reinsteckt. Zeit, Energie auch und das dann eben nicht für die Berufssoldaten hat, die ja eigentlich der wichtige Kern der Bundeswehr sind.
Okay, Mathis. Im schlechtesten Fall läuft's genau so. Aber was, wenn es gut funktioniert?
Ja.
Wenn es gut wird, im Best Case, ist der Dienst gerecht, lehrreich und einfach auch finanziell fair. Sowohl der Einzelne als auch die Gesellschaft profitieren, während halt so die wirtschaftlichen Nachteile irgendwie gut abgefedert werden, ne? Der Staat nutzt die Talente, die schon da sind und jeder kann sich innerhalb der Bundeswehr wenigstens seinen Einsatzbereich auch in der Grundausbildung aussuchen. Also wer zum Beispiel später Medizin studieren will, der wird da als Sanitäter top ausgebildet oder wer in die IT möchte, der lernt schon in der Cybersicherheit in der Bundeswehr irgendwie Dinge, die kein Studium dann am Ende auch so praxisnah vermitteln könnte. Also der Dienst wird dann zu so einem hochwertigen Sprungbrett, sage ich mal, das im Lebenslauf auch richtig was hermacht und richtig was bringt. Aber es geht natürlich am Ende um mehr als nur um Karriere, ne? In der Kaserne treffen Welten aufeinander, die sich sonst nie begegnen würden. Da schraubt dann vielleicht so die Tochter aus einem Villenviertel gemeinsam mit dem Jungen aus dem sozialen Brennpunkt am LKW-Motor. Und diese soziale Durchmischung, die kriegt die Bundeswehr im besten Fall hin und wirkt dann auch wirklich wie so ein gesellschaftlicher Kleber, der Vorurteile abbaut und uns als Gemeinschaft dann auch wirklich verbindet. Und damit das Ganze wirtschaftlich bleibt, klar, sorgt der Staat im Best Case für einen vollen Ausgleich, ne? Die 18 Monate zählen komplett für die Rente zum Beispiel oder das Gehalt ist auch so gut, dass man sich ein echtes Polster für das spätere Studium aufbauen kann. Und jede Frau, die den Dienst geleistet hat, die kriegt einen garantierten, kostenlosen Ganztagesplatz für ihre Kinder. Ist so meine Vision. Ohne Warteliste von der Krippe bis zur Grundschule. Also auch da gibt es eine Abfederung.
Ja. Mal gucken, wer am Ende recht hat. Ich kann alles gut verstehen. Ich würde vielleicht noch ergänzen, im Best Case ist ja dann auch wirklich so, dass wir wirklich sicherer und verteidigungsbereiter sind. Ne? Das kann man vielleicht noch so als Oberziel dazu packen.
Und genau deswegen sprechen wir auch drüber, weil es irgendwie gerade viele Leute interessiert und weil ihr uns natürlich auch geschrieben habt, ne, wir sind ja erreichbar per Mail oder auch per Kommentaren, dass ihr euch dieses Szenario mal wünscht, dass wir darüber sprechen und gucken, was die Evidenz da auch hergibt. Und wie immer freuen wir uns natürlich über Feedback zur Folge, Kritik, Ideen, weitere Anmerkungen. Ihr könnt uns natürlich immer in den Kommentaren schreiben oder auch unter malangenommen@ard.de.
Und ich bin ziemlich sicher, dass uns das Thema wahrscheinlich noch lange beschäftigen wird, also viel diskutiert werden wird über den Wehrdienst und das Thema Wehrpflicht. Und wenn ihr da auf dem aktuellen Stand immer bleiben wollt, dann empfehle ich euch heute mal eine Sache in eigener Sache quasi auch, nämlich unseren News-Podcast 630. Bin ich auch Host von diesem schönen Produkt und eine neue Folge haben wir da jeden Tag, Montag bis Freitag, immer so in ungefähr 20 Minuten das, was gerade wichtig ist. Zum Beispiel halt irgendeine Neuerung zum Thema Wehrdienst. Wer muss jetzt eigentlich wirklich hin? Wann fängt das mit der Musterung an und so weiter und so fort. Freuen wir uns natürlich auch sehr, wenn ihr da mal reinhört. Wenn ihr das noch nicht kennt, den Link zu 630 findet ihr wie immer in unseren Shownotes.
Und in den Shownotes findet ihr übrigens auch alle wichtigen Studien und Artikel, die wir gelesen haben. Und die Quellen sind wie immer in den Shownotes verlinkt. Und dann würde ich sagen, wir freuen uns, dass ihr zugehört habt und bis zum nächsten Mal.
Bis dann, ciao.
Quarks mal angenommen. Gemacht von SWR und WDR.